Okay, we're at the top of the hour. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. Um, so, the usual stuff applies. So, welcome to the Collaborative Science for Story series. This is Nick with the Science Collaborative. Today's webinar features a transfer project that evaluated the efficacy of a standardized uncrewed aerial system. It's a wetland monitoring protocol for assessing and monitoring emergent vegetation in a range of biogeographic regions across the NERRS system. And the project built on work that was done as part of a 2020 Catalyst project, which we also featured in the webinar series in 2022. I'll leave it there for now because I'm sure presenters will want to share more about that background themselves. But first, as always, I just have a quick introduction to the reserve system and the Science Collaborative program. So, the National Estuarine Research Reserve System is a national network of 30 unique reserves, as shown on this map. This is a NOAA program that works in collaboration with a local place-based partner, either a state agency, university, or nonprofit at each site. Each reserve site includes programs focused on the activities that you can see on the slide, which include land stewardship, research and scientific monitoring, training and engagement programs for the public and local officials, and education. And the Science Collaborative program's mission is to support collaborative research that addresses coastal management issues that are important to the reserve system and that strengthen the system's ability to impact coastal management and decision making. And one important way we meet this goal is by sharing these collaborative science accomplishments publicly through a variety of channels that include this webinar series, Collaborative Science for Estuaries, which features project teams supported by the Science Collaborative program staff, and partners. As you might imagine, webinars are a great way for us to share our project impacts more broadly and also really valuable learning opportunities for us as a program. Insights from speakers and participants like you are really helpful in informing how we support others in doing their own collaborative science work. For example, in the development of future workshops and webinars or resources such as tools, tips, and case studies for our open access guide to collaborative science, which can be found on our website. So with that in mind, we just want to inform attendees that any insights or feedback that you share, for example, in the chat or via the exit survey that'll open automatically when you leave the webinar, may be used for program learning and development purposes. Please note that if we do capture a direct quote from you that we'd like to use for learning purposes, we will reach out to you beforehand to seek permission and provide an explanation of its use. And any direct quotes would only be used anonymously. Okay, so finally, some housekeeping stuff. All attendees are muted upon entry, as you probably noticed. We'll be handling presentation-related questions via the Q&A feature or the chat. You can enter questions for the presenters as they occur to you throughout the webinar, and we'll plan to get to as many as we can following the presentation. You'll also be able to verbalize questions during the Q&A session if you'd like by just raising your hand. So raise your hand with the little feature there, and we'll call on you and unmute you to verbalize your question when we get to that point. Chat is visible to all, so you can use it to ask us questions or talk amongst yourselves if you need to. If you have a technical question, just try to get one of the organizers. You can direct chat us. It's myself or Ariana Stokes. All right, with that, let me introduce our speakers for today. So joining me today are Megan Lamb, the research coordinator and assistant manager at the Apalachicola Reserve, who served as the collaborative lead for the project, and Jared Franklin, the stewardship coordinator at Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, who served as the PI for the project from 2024 onwards. And I'm going to pass it to our team to get started.
Thank you so much, Nick, for the introduction. Thanks, Jared, for pulling up the slides. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you joined us today to learn more about this project. So Jared and I are going to be co-presenting today. So I'm going to start us off by first giving you a little introduction, talking about the background and the need we saw for this project, the project goals, and our project team, and then our first task for the project, building a community practice. Then I will turn it over to Jared, who will be talking about the next two tasks for the project, assessing the Drone the Swamp project standardized protocols, refining tools and sharing out, and lessons learned. So as a bit of an introduction and just set you up for the project, I know we have a lot of NERRS audience members, so I'm sure all our NERRS people know that we do a lot of emergent vegetation monitoring in the NERRS. And we really think it's important to assess emergent vegetation as part of the health of ecosystem assessments. We do a lot of traditional ground-based monitoring, but this does have some drawbacks. It can be labor-intensive, damage vegetation, and you can miss key differences in habitats if they're heterogeneous. One potential solution, satellite imagery, does it sidesteps some of those pitfalls, but you do also lose a lot of detail with satellite imagery and the resolution it offers. So as drones, uncrewed aerial systems, or UAS, as I'll refer to them during the talk, have been developed as a new and emerging technology. They've been looked at as possibly offering a less invasive alternative, um, and can certainly meet some of the needs. But as it's a new technology, NERRS staff need to build proficiency before adopting this. So the first project, Drone the Swamp, was a NERRS Science Collaborative project that took place from 2020 to 2022. And 6 reserves in the Southeast and Caribbean region used drones to monitor wetlands and develop standardized protocols for drone monitoring in wetlands. So in this project, was a big output was an SOP, or as they like to refer to it, like a cookbook for how to use drones to monitor your wetlands, from collecting the imagery to going through the imagery processing steps. So as that project wrapped up, there was a lot of excitement in the NERRS community about its success and the solutions it offered for wetland monitoring. So this project really built off of that project. And the primary goals for this project were to evaluate the feasibility of using drones on a broader scale across the NERRS system, build capacity across the NERRS to allow for more drone-based monitoring, and evaluate the existing protocol or SOP that was developed by that first project for future use by additional reserves. So to accomplish the goal, this project had 3 specific tasks. The first is to build a NERRS drone community of practice to evaluate the Drone the Swamp SOP across a wider range of biogeographic regions, across different drone platforms. Different reserves have different drones, different brands, different sensors, and across user levels. And then finally, refine existing tools and share information learned with the broader NERRS community. And this is the project team that we put together. This is a big project team. I think this is the biggest team that I've worked with for any project. And that's reflective certainly of the excitement around using drones. And then also, the different roles that we all carry at the reserves. At some reserves, the same person served as sort of coordinator, drone pilot, and analyzing the data. And at other reserves, the different roles were held by 3 different people. Also key to our project team was our technical advisory team. So our tech advisory group, Alex, Brandon, Eric, and Justin, they made the cookbook in the first NERRS Science Collaborative project. So they are expert level users that as many people in our project team were new or kind of mid-level drone users and didn't have as much experience doing this kind of work. They provided the technical expertise that we needed if we ran into stumbling blocks. So extremely helpful and just a great project team to work with overall. Okay, so I'm going to dive into our first task, which is building a community of practice. So this was our first task for the project, and some of the subtasks that we identified that we needed to set forth was to define the community of practice, set up a workspace. We wanted to compile resources for the community and also have a feedback loop, how these resources were working, and overall establish confidence and familiarity with drone-based monitoring. And as we started planning and progressing on the project, we identified additional initiatives to help achieve the task and sustain the community of practice. So we wanted to reestablish the larger NERRS drone work group. This group had kind of fizzled over time, so we wanted to reestablish that group, create a separate community of practice report, We wanted to hold a Drone the NERRS project mini symposium for our own project team towards the end of the project time to share results and lessons learned as part of our feedback. We also wanted to survey the wider NERRS community on drone uses and needs, and then share that needs report and community of practice report with the newly reestablished drone work group. So first, we set up to define our community of practice, and we were planning for the project. We really took a step back and had a lot of kind of philosophical discussions about what makes the community of practice, what our goals were, and then also this was a 12-month transfer grant. So what was achievable during this short time period? And we defined our project team as the community of practice in the short term, but hoped that we could gather information and recommendations that would feed into the larger community of practice and live beyond the project. We also we gave ourselves additional structure. We wanted to set up a workspace. We did end up using a Google Drive, which we discussed other options, but given the resources we had, we decided this works best, and then that would help capture information. We had monthly team calls. With a large project team, attendance, 100% attendance at monthly team calls was really difficult. So we wanted to make sure we had a lot of other opportunities to communicate and gather feedback. So we had a lot of one-on-one calls, text, emails, and so on. It was really invaluable to be able to consult with our technical advisory team as much as we needed. They were very generous with their time and responding to emails and calls. And frequent communication was really crucial to promoting knowledge transfer during the course of this project. Okay, so we also we surveyed the wider NERRS community on drone uses and needs and turned this into a sort of report. We sent this out on the NERRS All Listserv list. We invited everyone, no matter what sector, to respond. And we asked questions like how people were currently using drones, what brands of drones, we asked them technical questions, what brands of drones and sensors and software they were using, and what their barriers to drone use and challenges were. We really hope this information would feed into the community, a wider community practice, and really identify some of the needs that community could respond to. So we did get a great response. And in the poll, we had 40 respondees from 19 NERRS. People responded from all sectors, and we think that's great. We really wanted to make sure all sectors were included in this community of practice. 55% were current drone users, but we also had people respond who aren't current drone users but want to be or want to use drone imagery. When we asked about what drones are currently being used for across the NERRS, we got responses such as habitat mapping and monitoring, wildlife surveys, disaster response and mapping, and also items like trainings, workshops, outreach tools and demos, and using drones to get footage for marketing and websites. We did get a variety of responses when we asked about the brand of drones, sensors, the image processing, and flight app software. It is important to note that different state and federal laws might dictate which brands of drones some reserves can use, or if you're using federal money, you might have restrictions versus some state money to buy your equipment. And then also, agencies and universities might have differing software agreements. So we think that drones, the sensors, and the software is not going to be a one-size-fits-all across the NERRS system. There's going to be a variety of different technologies used, and we wanted the community of practice to be able to kind of meet the needs for people using these different types of technology. Some of the barriers people identified was funding, staff capacity, lack of certified drone pilots. If you are flying a drone for any type of compensation, you are required to have an FAA 107 pilot's license. Logistics limitations, jurisdiction limitations. So, some of our NERRS might be located right next to an airport or a military base with some airspace restrictions. Some managed areas have different restrictions. For example, national wildlife refuges do not allow drone flights. In Florida, state parks do not allow drone flights. And then some people just said they didn't even know where to begin with drones. And then the challenges, when we asked the respondents about that, lined up a lot with those barriers that we just mentioned, keeping up with the changing technologies, legalities, and regulations, keeping pilot's licenses current, troubleshooting all the drones, the sensors, the software, and then knowledge about what to do with the data. Once you fly and collect images, what do you do with it? So this survey really gave us a lot of information. We shared with the newly reinvigorated NERRS drone community of practice to inform their activities. And so the NERRS drone community of practice was reestablished. One of our technical advisory team members, Justin Rich, has taken the lead on that. There's his contact information if you'd like to reach out to him to get more information or to join the community. I think the entire project team from this project is also part of the community of practice. But we did have a lot of familiarity with drones gained throughout the project. So Reserve obtained new drone sensors, hardware, and software. We added 6 new drone pilots to the NERRS system. 6 of the project team members were able to attend the Duke Nicholas School of the Environment UAS training course that Justin offered a few years ago. It's been offered twice, and I know that there's been discussion about the possibility of it being offered in the future. And a huge amount of experience gained through the process of evaluating the SOP from the Drone to Swamp project. And a huge amount of knowledge transfer occurred during consultations with the technical advisory team and monthly meetings. And the community of practice report and UAS needs assessment reports that I mentioned, these links just go to our Neuroscience Collaborative project homepage. These are reports from the project, and they're available to anyone through that page. And so our last item that we wanted to really count for a knowledge transfer and feedback was we decided to have an in-house mini symposium towards the end of the project to share all of the results from the different NERRS, compare our results, discuss the challenges and successes, and at least qualitatively analyze the difference in results between different NERRS and how well the protocol worked for the different NERRS. The team members found this really useful. We discussed like the different type of equipment used at each reserve, the different types of habitats, and successes and challenges. And then the points from this mini symposium were incorporated into the project's final white paper, and key takeaways were shared with the NERRS drone work group. Jared will touch on that as well in a little bit. But the symposium was a really important part of our feedback loop and capturing those outcomes and challenges. A lot of our project team members were beginner and intermediate drone users, and so we found there was a steep learning curve as we were working our way through it, but we ultimately had some excellent results. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Jared to discuss the project tasks 2 and 3.
Thanks, Megan. So yeah, really building off of our community of practice and the knowledge and the skills gained there, we moved forward to task 2, which was the assessment of the NERRS drone marsh monitoring protocol that was put together by the Drone to Swamp project. And so in order to do this, we pretty much just followed the protocol. The protocol had 3 main parts. The first part being conducting both UAS-based and ground-based monitoring. Most reserves did this in their wetlands and water levels sites. So areas that already had ground-based vegetation monitoring. Following the collection of the drone imagery, that imagery was processed using either Pix4D mapper or drone to map. And then the outputs were analyzed compared to the ground-based monitoring results, and just different determinations made about the efficacy of the protocol. So after each reserve conducted these steps, we got together and did a qualitative assessment of the drone marsh monitoring protocol. So this happened through our in-house mini symposium, as well as through feedback from individual reserves through a questionnaire that was sent out. And then finally, we stored and shared the data collected from this project. So in terms of following the SOP, as I mentioned before, it was largely broken up into 3 sections. The first one going over collecting ground-based and UAS-based data. The second part was processing that data using Pix4D mapper or drone to map. And so generally reserves either chose one or the other, but we did have several reserves try out both drone to map and Pix4D. And generally we found that Pix4D worked a bit better than drone to map. But using those programs, each reserve created orthomosaics, digital surface models, digital terrain models, and or normalized different vegetation index, depending on the needs of each reserve. And then following the third section of the protocol, each reserve analyzed the UAS imagery outputs for the specific products that met their individual needs. And finally, the data collected from the drones was compared with ground collected vegetation data, analyze differences between the 2 data collection methods. And so really I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of the process using examples from 2 of the reserves participating in this project. So on the West Coast, we had South Sludner in Oregon. They used a DJI Matrice 300 RTK with an Altum PT sensor. And they were primarily flying freshwater tidal wetlands. And on the Gulf Coast, we had Apalachicola NERRS in Florida using an IF 800 Tomcat with a MicaSense Red Edge P sensor. And here are some of the imagery from those flights. South SLU used Pix4D to analyze their imagery. Apalachicola used drone to map. One of the analyses that we did was looking at ecotones and ecotone delineation. And really the project team found that this was a whole lot straightforward to do from the computer using the drone imagery, as opposed to delineating ecotones in the field. It was just a much smoother process using the drone imagery, easier to pick out where the ecotones were, and caused quite a bit less disturbance to the habitats. Each reserve also did auto classification for their imagery, and we were primarily looking at the vegetated versus unvegetated. We did have some thoughts about going into more detail, looking at high marsh, low marsh, or even different species, but that was really just outside of the scope of this project and what we were able to do given our time. And following the auto classification, each reserve conducted an accuracy assessment, choosing a subset of points within the mapped areas to determine how accurate the auto classification was. So after each reserve went through that process, we got together at our mini symposium and really just talked about how the protocol worked out, what worked, what didn't work, some suggestions for improvement. And so we collected that feedback. And we also collected some more detailed feedback in the form of a reserve by reserve questionnaire. So if you're curious about some of the details of that feedback, a summary of that is included on our project white paper, which is located on our Science Collaborative webpage. And the data, a lot of the imagery from this project is stored with the CDMO, which is available for anyone who's interested in looking at that. Moving on to task 3, which was refining existing tools and sharing with the broader NERRS community. So essentially taking what we learned from this project, sharing it out, and using it to further the knowledge and skills of folks in the National Estuarine Research Reserve System around drones. So this took place in 3 parts. Identifying areas of challenge and refining existing tools, disseminating information to the wider NERRS community and existing partners, and producing a white paper to share with the broader NERRS UAS community. So several areas of challenge were identified throughout the course of this project. I'll get into some of those in a little bit. They've been addressed in several of the outputs that have been shared out. So these outputs include the white paper, which was mentioned before, and that white paper essentially summarizes the project with some of the site information, drones that were used, sensors that were used, and feedback about the protocol. It includes lessons learned, successes, failures, and recommendations for future UAS-based research. We also produced a community of practice report summarizing project team discussion, setting up a UAS community of practice. And finally, we created a summary of the NERRS drone needs assessment, highlighting key takeaways of the survey. So these documents have been shared with the NERRS drone work group and the Drone the Swamp project team for further refinement of existing tools moving forward. And all of these are available on the NSC project page. So some of the primary challenges associated with this project included software issues. This was one of the bigger challenges, just with the processing software crashing or not working, or files needing to be saved in a certain way or under a certain type. Thankfully, we did work through that, but it was a bit of a challenge and a bit frustrating at times. We also did have to deal with restricted airspace, which limited the ability of some of our NERRS to fly. We had some difficulties with file storage space. The drone imagery took up quite a bit of space, and just issues with finding places to store it, slow network connections, and things of that sort. Several reserves had difficulty with flying or processing imagery in areas with trees, but we were able to work around that as well. And then finally, just a couple of the learning curves associated with this project, including collecting, processing, and analyzing the drone data, as well as with identification and RTKs. So really, in conclusion, despite the challenges that we found associated with drone use, we found that UAS-based habitat monitoring is feasible on a broader scale across the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, particularly when it's integrated with ground-based vegetation monitoring. And so what we found is the ground-based monitoring is really helpful for looking at the closer details, species composition, vegetation height, things of that sort. Whereas the UAS-based monitoring is better at looking at things at a broader scale and causing less damage to the ecosystem. So by marrying the two, we can really get the strengths of both of them and have a more robust monitoring program moving forward. The project team found that the drone marsh monitoring protocol was an invaluable asset for our work, and we really do want to thank the Drone the Swamp team for their work with that. All of the reserves involved in this project plan on using that protocol moving forward at each of their reserves. And finally, we found that the sharing of expertise, time, and resources across the reserve system is going to be integral to the process of building UAS capacity. In terms of next steps, the NERRS drone work group has already begun to meet. And if anyone's interested in joining, Justin Ridge is the person to contact for that. And so that work group is sharing information, troubleshooting, a really great resource for folks in the NERRS looking to build on existing drone-based monitoring or looking to learn more about it. As mentioned before, all of the reserves participating in this project intend to continue to use the protocol moving forward. And we found that while some barriers to UAS usage remain, it's our hope that this project, the connections created, and the identification of possible solutions will facilitate further development of UAS-based mapping within the NERRS system. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone, thank the Science Collaborative for funding this project, and thank the Drone the Swamp team for their work. And with that, I think we have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Megan and Jared. We did get a few questions in the chat already. If you have others, you can feel free to send them our way as well. I saw a few of the questions were related to accessing some of the resources, so maybe I'll just start with those. Somebody had asked if those results were publicly available. They are. They're on the page, on the project team's project page, and I linked them above in the chat. If you didn't see it, it's the one that says summary reports can be found here. And then I think somebody else later had asked if you could see the original protocol from the 2020 project, and I posted that as well just now. That's the original drone monitoring protocol. So I can maybe I'll look for the other link too in a moment here because we did that the other webinar, the other team that the 2020 team also presented their original results from that first protocol development process, and that webinar was recorded too. So if you're interested in this stuff and want to see where it came from, you can go back and see that one as well. But I'll dig that up in a second. So we have a few other questions that have come in since then. First one, I guess I'll pitch to you both. What algorithm did you use for the auto classifications for vegetated versus unvegetated areas?
I don't think Jared or I can answer that question. We did not we're not the analysis people for the imagery. But I would ask, first of all, I will try to find an answer for you, Kate. I'll follow up if we can't get an answer for you right now. I am wondering if, I don't think any of our technical advisory team is on, but I don't know if Becca or Jenny might have an answer, might be able to throw an answer into the chat if you remember. But as I said, I will look and find an answer for you and try to get that to you, Kate, if we can't, if no one knows it from our project team right now.
It's a big team, folks, with lots of
Thanks,
advisors.
Jennifer.
Jennifer says supervised classification for veg classification.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, another question that is probably maybe somebody in the audience. I haven't taken a close look at the audience, but somebody from South Carolina is wondering if they have a contact person they can reach out to for NERRS projects and opportunities. I can address the second part. We don't currently have any active opportunities, but that doesn't mean that you can't, reach out and start seeing if you have similar interests for what opportunities are available. Um, Let me see here. Somebody posted something, I think, in the chat. Yep, thank you. On the NERRS in South Carolina. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, next question. Are LiDAR sensors affordable for use with drones? This could allow for vegetation height and a variety of valuable data. Do you want to talk about the cost stuff a little bit? I remember there were some details early on that had to do with permitting stuff that came up.
Yes. So nobody on the project team used LiDAR. We just used RGB sensors for this project, and that's what the protocols are written for. In terms of cost, we did mention a little bit like the difference in what states can buy. So the big thing that's happening right now with regulations is a lot of the Chinese drones and DJI drones are kind of being phased out of you being able to buy with federal dollars and also some state dollars. And in Florida, where I am, we are no longer allowed to purchase DJI drones or use them, even if we own them already. So the drone costs that we're currently looking at, a DJI drone you might be able to get for $5,000 to $10,000. We're now looking at for a comparable drone. It's on the blue list, like $30,000. RGB sensors, probably about $10,000. And then I don't have an exact price on the LiDAR sensor, but maybe I think $20,000 to $30,000 still. So it certainly affords some different opportunities. That being said, even with RGB and a lot of drones have they're like PPK enabled now. You can get really, really good elevation accuracy without using a LiDAR sensor with some of these really good drones and how accurate they are. And then, Jennifer talked about other things. So that's the level of detail that I can tell you. I can't tell you exact pricing. Costs certainly are coming down, but a $30,000 drone with a $10,000 sensor plus training plus it's still a significant chunk of money from someone's budget. So I think we're hopeful that costs will continue to come down and make the technology more accessible. And some states certainly it is if you're still allowed to use DJI drones. Some of our teams did, and DJI drones and sensors are very good products and offer equal products to the more expensive blue list drones that we used in Florida. I
think that's a very good summary. And that it's about what I remember from early in the project too. So another question we have here, do you think UAS could eventually replace the in-field manual vegetation monitoring or at least reduce the need for it? I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually one that we talked about a good bit during our mini symposium. And yeah, we can definitely see the possibility of drones reducing the need for ground-based surveying. Just seems like at the moment there needs to be some sort of ground-based surveying involved. So just because from a drone you're looking from the top down, and if you're looking at say percent cover, sometimes you can have multiple layers of cover, and that's not really something that you can capture quite as well using the drones. Also, if folks are interested in looking at percent cover of different plant species, unless there's a relatively low diversity of plant species growing at a given site, and those plants look very different from the air, that can be hard to pick out as well. Now, that being said, just given how much the technology is changing and moving forward, I can see some of those issues being tackled in the upcoming years. But yeah, really for the time being, it seems like um, it it has to be a mixture of both. Of course, depending on the research goals. But something that we did float during our mini symposium was essentially doing ground-based vegetation surveys once every 3 to 5 years or so, and then in the years when we're not on the ground, using the drones to fly and see what changes, if any, there's been in the vegetation at those sites.
A lot of interesting potential. Um, okay, so there's a very engaged chat, so I'm following in both places. So thank you to everybody who's answering questions. You're making my job a million times easier. So thank you. Um, I'm just picking a few that I think have not been answered in the chat already. Have there been any UAS-based surveys of mangroves in the NERRS? Have there ever? If so, how was your experience in creating orthomosaics and elevation models in areas dominated by trees?
That's that's a great question. And so here at Rookery Bay, we are a mangrove dominated system. Um, and for this project, portion of our study area was mangrove, more so mangrove marsh ecotone. So roughly mangroves about 5 meters tall or so, in some places interspersed with salt marsh vegetation. And yeah, we didn't have a ton of difficulty that I'm aware of with that. With creating orthomosaics or really any of the main outputs for this project. I can say that for LiDAR mapping, it does get quite a bit more complicated. Um, and we personally don't do most of the LiDAR mapping we do is in partnership with a local university that has their own LiDAR unit. And so um, they would probably know more specifics about that than I would. But yeah, we found drones are great for especially just scouting out areas, looking at mangrove health, looking at areas of stressed mangroves. And actually, yesterday, Jill and Greg, our two drone pilots, were out flying over a mangrove restoration area that we just finished some work on. That imagery is really going to be helpful for us in determining any additional adaptive management that we're going to need for that restoration area.
There are a few other examples too of other projects that have done drone mapping in areas that are very dense with trees. The example that comes to mind is they did a webinar last month. That's the Lake Superior one. There were a lot of trees, and part of their project was classification, and there was a lot of drone imagery associated with that. So maybe look at that one too. I can post a link to that in a moment too. But that's another one that maybe is worth exploring if you're interested in monitoring with trees, with very dense tree areas. Okay, so next question. I know you mentioned this project focused on RGB cameras, but I'm wondering if anyone had used the MicaSense Red Edge P dual camera. Oh, someone's answering. Thanks, Rebecca. Maybe we'll just skip that one. We'll let the chat handle that one. So another question about the community of practice is the community of practice collaborating with any others like the Mid-Atlantic Coastal UAS community of practice? And I see, oh, Megan actually answered that one. I'm catching up on chat, sorry. So, yes, a few members of our team are involved in the Mid-Atlantic community of practice. I believe some members from the Chesapeake Bay Reserve. We also have overlap with members participating with the other one in the coastal zone. Okay, cool. Very nice. Trying to see my other questions here. Did I miss any? This is the downside of a very active chat, is that I need to catch up to you. So But I see it's great to see people talking. I it's really fun to see engagement. I think we answered all the ones that are currently in there. Okay. Well, we still have some time, so if anybody else has any other questions, we're happy to answer them. Has the reserve on the Hudson River used the drones to map the wetlands? That's a good question. I don't see anybody here from Hudson River, but it's a big audience list, so let me scan through here. If you are here, feel free to answer yourself.
Yeah, no Hudson projects come to mind for me. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but I don't know of any off the top of my head.
Nothing occurs to me off the top of my head either. But again, I would only be familiar with the projects that we funded. So if they've done anything that's not funded by the Science Collaborative, I don't know about that. Um, and again, if somebody from Hudson is here and wants to answer, go right ahead. Do you anticipate using drones to assess damage from storms? That's a good one.
Absolutely. We've, Rookery Bay Reserve, we're down here in South Florida, basically Hurricane Alley. So we've been hit by a number of hurricanes over the past few years, and I've actually used our drone to assess hurricane damage, both to our buildings and some of our infrastructure as well. We have a series of boardwalks out to our long-term monitoring sites, and I think it was Hurricane Ian. Honestly, at this point, all the storms are just rolling together. But I believe it was after Hurricane Ian, we got about 6 feet of storm surge, and it lifted up our boardwalks and pushed it somewhere else. And we had to use the drone to figure out where everything was, so we could go and get it in a way that wouldn't cause more damage to the vegetation than was necessary.
I was trying to see if Danielle was in the attendance today because I know that she has done some drone work in Rookery with you as well. I don't see her here. That's okay. There have been lots of projects focused on storm recovery that we have supported, I know, over the years. If you're interested, check the website. Um, Another question here about the cost of obtaining an FAA pilot's license. I think you talked about that in your report, right?
Um, I don't, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but Samantha chimed in about step 175. I think the fee to take the test with the FAA, I was thinking it was around $200. Um, there are, you can pay for like to join study classes and such when you're preparing for the test, but you don't have to. There's, resources available online and such that you can use for free also to prepare for the test. And yeah, it's a one-time fee to take the test. I mean, if you pass, if you don't pass the first time, you have to pay the fee again, of course. But and then every few years, you have to meet sort of a continuing education requirement and retest, and that's free and available online through the FCA website. So it's not too bad.
Samantha added, I tried getting my students certified to get their license. That's cool. Is there any interest in using drones to assess submerged vegetation, such as seagrass, in the reserve system?
Yes. Yes. Uh, I mean, the short answer is there is a lot of interest with seagrass. You can use aerial drones, if you have good water clarity and can see through the water. A lot of our estuaries don't have that. And so, there's a lot of people who are working on developing, water drone kind of things that will be able to assess those things. But I don't believe the technology is there yet, but it's being worked on. But yeah, you need nice clear water if your drone's going to get a good picture of the seagrass.
Molly added something. UNC Chapel Hills had done some seagrass drone work. Oh yeah, that rings a bell. Yep, in North Carolina. That sounds familiar. I was thinking, like, I knew somebody had done something with submerged vegetation. I was trying to remember who it was. So thank you, Molly. Okay. Well, we have a few minutes left. We can take more questions if folks want. or we can wrap up early. I'm happy either way. I know the team, I already warned them that if anybody sends me questions after the fact, they still have to answer them via email. So if you want to give them homework, you totally can, or you can ask your questions now because it's field season and they're busy. So Jared reminded me that it's always field season in Florida before we jumped to the webinar today. So that's what you get for having warm weather, you know. Um, okay. Well, I don't see any other stuff coming into chat again. Oh, one more. Okay. Anyone know arrival of the Pix 4D capture? Someone mentioned a few things earlier in the chat, but do you want to answer that anyway, verbally? I know we talked about it like a while back in the beginning of the project.
Um, yeah, so I'm not familiar with Pix4D capture. Um, we we used Pix4D mapper as well as drone to map for image processing. And generally, we found that the Pix4D mapper worked better, just worked faster and gave us better results. But yeah, not familiar with capture.
Bradley has an answer. For image processing, Agisoft, am I saying that right? Metashape is known to work well, but it's Russian. Might have some trouble there if you had trouble with the other stuff. Flight planning app. Okay. Interesting.
Chris, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that we, in both the community assessment report, we listed, the different planning apps that people reported they used. It didn't include the level of detail of like if they think they worked well or that kind of thing, but there is a list of a couple others that people in the system used in that report that's available through the project webpage.
I'll put the link here one more time too, just for convenience if anybody wants it. So all the reports from this project are right there. And there's 3 on one page. So, and there's lots to share. There's also data stuff too that's on the project page that's not associated with that page. But if you scroll to the bottom of the page that I did link here, there's a link to the project page that has all the other resources associated with the project there. So you can find everything there if you're curious. Lots of stuff there. So okay, well, with our last few minutes here, I think I will just transition us to wrapping up. Again, if anybody has any other questions, you can drop them in the chat on your way out or put them in the exit survey. As I mentioned at the beginning, in case you missed it, as soon as you close the session, it'll launch automatically. If you do have feedback for us on how the webinar series runs, please feel free to drop it in there. I do read the comments after all the webinars, so we're always learning and evaluating. And if you have feedback that will improve the webinar experience, please do feel free to share it. We are off next month for the webinar series, but we're planning to be back in September. We just haven't gotten everything quite squared away yet. So just keep an eye out for future announcements. If you want to sign up for them, you can sign up for them on our website. So, and with that, I just want to send a big thank you to Jared and Megan for taking the time to be with us today and for putting together such a great presentation. And again, for taking time away from your busy schedule because I know how busy you both are. So thank you for being here. Thank you for answering questions. And thank you to everybody, especially the chat, for being so engaged and helping answer questions. Made my job a lot easier. So we'll catch you in the next one. And if you're looking for the recording, usually I get it processed within a couple days. Tomorrow's Friday, so I might have time to get it done tomorrow, but no promises. So if it's not Friday, check back later in the day on Monday. But yeah, if you're looking for the recording, it'll be there and on our YouTube channel. All right, that's it. Take care, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining us.